Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Canadian Institute for Public Safety Research and Treatment's COVID-19 Virtual Town Hall Series. My name is Emily Kosick, and I'm the Knowledge Manager at CIPSRT. Our topic today is PSP Leadership and Mental Health. We're going to have a presentation followed by a question and answer period. I encourage you to send your questions for the presenters through the question box throughout the presentation. This is a reminder that the town hall is being recorded for later viewing. However, CIPSRT does not have permission to share the PowerPoint presentation. Please contact the individual presenter if you have any questions about the slides. Now let me introduce our presenters for today. First, we have Randy Mellow, who is the Chief of Peterborough Paramedic Service and President of the Paramedic Chiefs of Canada. You want to give a quick wave there, Randy?
Hello, everyone.
And then we have the current Director of Training at CIPSRT, Dr. Ron Camp. He is also an associate professor at the University of Regina Hill-Levene Schools of Business. I'd like to pass it over then to Ron Camp, who is going to start the presentation.
Well, good day, everybody. I'd like to briefly give some context here as I welcome you to this town hall discussion. Well, we're talking about leadership and mental health for public safety personnel. That's a huge topic area and something bigger than we've got time to discuss today. But what we do want to talk and focus on, what Randy and I wanted to talk with you about, was the idea of how operational environment, which we can't control, and the organizational environment, which we can influence to some extent as leaders, can create high levels of uncertainty for the public safety personnel, which can in turn lead to stress, anxiety, and OSIs for public safety personnel. So after we briefly introduce you to these ideas and explain a little bit about how this works, we'd like to discuss how public safety leaders can use three primary leadership roles: envisioning, aligning, and inspiring, to reduce the organizational uncertainty and support the mental health of public safety personnel. Now, there's a little disclaimer here, and I'm sure Randy will back me up on this. You will back me up on this, Randy, won't you?
Absolutely, I've got your back.
Okay, good. What we're going to talk about today is based both on experience that both Randy and I have, and on research. Given that what we're trying to present is an evidence-informed approach to leadership, this is still my opinion and it's Randy's opinion. This is not the official position or opinion or policy of either CIPSRT or the University of Regina. I believe that's also the position that Randy's taking for the organizations he represents. Is that true, Randy?
Absolutely. For Paramedic Chiefs of Canada or my paramedic service, this really is, as you've described, our opinions and don't necessarily represent those organizations.
Right. So if you love what we say, please give us the credit for it. And if you hate what we say, well, we take full blame and responsibility for that as well.
Broad shoulders, for sure.
Broad shoulders. Randy, could you introduce yourself with a little more detail, please?
Sure. Thanks, Ron. So yeah, Randy Mellow. I'm the Chief of the Paramedic Service in Peterborough, Ontario. So it's an area about an hour and a half outside of Toronto. I have a paramedic group, about 144 staff, advanced care and primary care paramedics. I'm also the president of the Paramedic Chiefs of Canada. So that's a national association representing leadership across our nation from coast to coast to coast, all the provinces and territories. And our mission is to advance and align leadership in Canada. And that's what led us to, and PCC and myself personally, to be enthusiastically involved in the third bullet as a member of the CIPSRT Public Safety Steering Committee. I was fortunate to be a member of that committee from the start, and it aligns with the work that I do on all three of those bullets. You'll see their leadership within my service, helping to align leadership across the country as well. So that's me in a nutshell, Ron.
And I'm Ron Camp. I'm the Director of Training, as Emily pointed out. I'm also the co-academic director for the for ICD Rotman Director's Education Program, and an associate professor of business at the Hill-Levene Schools of Business. And my area of focus is governance and leadership. For the last, 3 or 4 years anyway, I've been involved in, people who are involved with CIPSRT and getting getting the idea that mental health is more than just clinical psychology or social work, and that supporting mental health for public safety in Canada includes the role of leadership, and it includes dealing with organizational issues beyond the operational stressors that we believe are critical in the development of mental health problems for public safety personnel. There is a role for the organization. It's not just something that we should be handing off to counselors and therapists and say, hey, fix our people. There are things that we can be doing from a leadership and an organizational perspective to prevent some of these problems from starting in the first place. Now, that being said, we have a few provisos here. At the best of times, public safety functions in an environment which has been described as being VUCA. It's volatile, it's uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. That being said, we're in an unprecedented situation at the current time. Nobody can fully prepare for a pandemic. There are things that are happening now that 4 months ago we didn't dream of. We also need to recognize that we're dealing with COVID-19 as a marathon, not a sprint. We're all learning about how to cope with this together in real time. And there's no one right or wrong answer to deal with what we're seeing. Everyone needs to be seen as trying their best. I think we need to accept that the leadership is doing the best they can in extremely difficult situations, that public safety personnel, police officers, paramedics, firefighters, border agents, all of these people are doing the best they can in a situation they didn't train for and they couldn't have planned for. And I think Randy will back me up in this in saying that we're not here to play gotcha with the leaders saying you should have done better. What we're here is to offer some of our own insights based on our research and our own experience and say, here's some tips and tricks that we think, here's a better way to understand this so that we can get closer and closer to best practice so we can support both leadership and the members of these very critical organizations at this time to do the best they can and to stay as healthy and safe as we can help them to be.
I think that's incredibly important to lay that groundwork right now, to say that this is absolutely unprecedented time. Where there was a playbook, the playbook's out the window now. There are no established set plans or rules. It has to change because we're learning as we go along. I was going to use the word mistakes. I don't want to use the word mistakes, but deviation from the path towards our desired outcome is going to occur, and we need to accept that. And as leaders, we need to acknowledge that that's the world I'm living in as a leader, and the world that my police officer, my corrections officer, my border service, my paramedic, that's the world they're living in. And we have to understand that as leaders in order to really be able to react about to what we're going to hear in the next few slides about the VUCA environment.
Right. And I think that's a good lead into this notion of VUCA. VUCA is a coin that was termed, yes, it was a coin that was termed by the military, the American military in 1987. Lots of their research indicated that the environment that they were dealing with was volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And that in these VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous environments, it's difficult to say what's happening right now. And because it's difficult to say what's happening right now, it's difficult to plan for that. And a lot of what we train leaders, supervisors, and so on is management. It's not leadership, it's management. It's that this is how you create a plan. This is how you monitor people's performance towards that plan to make sure that we get the performance that we're looking for. Well, in a really complex, uncertain, ambiguous environment where things are changing frequently and rapidly and unexpectedly, it's almost impossible to say, these are exactly the things you need to do, and we're going to make sure you're doing it. So the state of the environment is unstable, to say the least. Given that, what I should do in response to how my environment is changing and what I'm seeing and trying to make sense of it, it's difficult. I'm not always clear what I can do. And if I've got a very prescribed set of steps I have to take that are no longer appropriate, well, then doing the right thing is exactly the wrong thing to do, and so I won't get the outcomes I'm looking for. So even if I do what I'm trying to do, will I succeed?
Right.
So I create in this VUCA environment, in a normal situation, a normal VUCA environment for public safety, create lots of uncertainty.
But in that,
Randy deals with that.
in that day-to-day environment, prior to COVID-19, we still had routine. We had set game plans, paths that we expect to take, and but there was still a high degree of VUCA environment in any of the public safety realms. But now throw in COVID-19. Someone referred to it as Schrodinger's virus. We have to treat ourselves as both infected but not infected at the same time. Take precautions, and that just puts us in our day-to-day lives in such a level of uncertainty. But then bring that into the workplace, and you start to put in your bullet number 3 about outcomes and will I succeed? It's more complex than that now. It's how will I affect others? Could I pass the virus on to somebody else? Am I bringing it home to my family? Do I have to make decisions that I didn't make before to put safety in place where the person I'm responding to as a police officer or as a paramedic or anyone else may suffer somewhat until we put decisions in place. So that VUCA environment is so exaggerated right now, that ambiguity. We don't know much about the virus. It was airborne, then it was droplet precaution, and so it's we have it in the best of times, and we try to deal with that. But it's just that game book is out the window, and now we have to be so fluid, and certainly it's exaggerated that uncertainty and the ambiguity for sure.
Right, and I think part of the problem with this crisis and part of the VUCA problem is what success is sometimes isn't clearly defined.
That's right.
And if we focus too much on these concrete plans with discrete objectives, and this is what success looks like in these very prescriptive terms, we lose sight of the bigger picture. Right? And when it comes down to it, then we're dealing with part of the leadership role, which is around creating a vision for the organization. Success means, well, it means healthy communities. And what does it mean to create a healthy community? Well, it's different in this pandemic than it was 6 months ago. And that's part of the role of leadership then, is to keep up with how these things are changing, and how do we orient ourselves and our organizations to a definition of success that actually still means something and helps people to stay focused and grounded and working towards that successful outcome. Because we don't know that, we have this uncertainty that's increasing stress and anxiety. We know that. I know that intellectually, I know that from the research, and talking to Randy, talking to members of the Regina Police Service and others, I keep hearing how that's being acted out in real time in real people's lives. We're seeing that stress and anxiety building. And again, there's both operational and organizational components to that. So some research we published recently suggests that from an operational perspective, fatigue, time available with family and friends, and traumatic events all contribute to stress. These are all operational contributors to stress and anxiety for public safety personnel.
And again, this is a period of time where we would normally put fairly effective things in place to help individuals for the fatigue, the not available, not enough time for their family and friends. We can't do that now. We're isolating individuals. They can't go to the gym. They can't work out. Right. We need to find ways to support people in that environment. Paramedics or their healthcare workers are often isolated while they're being tested for COVID-19. So how can we support those individuals? Even things like just providing them Wi-Fi while they're in a hotel room, those types of things are so important to help them through some of those types of stresses, because the normal remedies that we would, or helpful things we would put into place just don't exist right now. So, and again, it's those we have some control over. It's a bit difficult. And we get into the organizational, that's a different story for sure. Right. We have much more control over that.
Right. And so the second bullet point, not enough time for family and friends. We have the opposite problem for a number of public safety personnel right now, especially with shift work, coming home needing to sleep during the day. And now my kids who would normally be in school, giving me a nice quiet environment to sleep in, are underfoot, so to speak, interrupting my sleep, which contributes more to fatigue. And now I've got this frustration with family because they're interrupting my ability to sleep. And because I'm not sleeping, I don't have the resources available to cope with these minor frustrations, and it can kind of snowball. We can't control that. That's just part of the environment that we're currently in.
We can't control it, but we can acknowledge it, and just letting our staff know that we understand, and reacting in a way and opening communications and letting them know that as leaders that we're trying to do our best to support them at that time. There are ways to adjust, again, on the organizational side. There's some ways to adjust on the operational side too, though, to try to offset those increased stressors. So in our shop, we have moved away from quality control reviews of patient charts right now. Now's not the time to do that. We need to support in other ways, because as we go through the slides, we'll hear about how people have these interpretational biases to communications that were a normal communication to them. So if they had an email before from the quality assurance department, that's like seeing a snake. Eek, that's a bad. So knowing
which factors into this next slide where we're talking about the feeling that you always have to prove yourself, right?
Exactly.
And as you said, this isn't really the best time to be encouraging this view that you have to be proving yourself.
That's exactly right.
A time where we need a consistent leadership style throughout organizations, not just from the chiefs, but from the chiefs all the way down to the supervisors of individual shifts, that we've got your back, we believe in you, and there are bigger issues right now about supporting you than about doing charting and making sure that that's all right.
Right. And I think one of the successes we've seen in Ontario for the paramedic world anyway, and there's lessons I think to learn there, we know that things had to change. The playbook has changed for paramedics during COVID-19. So when patient care standards changed or our regulations around patient care changed, they actually produced what was called a considerations document rather than the you shall do this document. So just in that messaging alone, we're supporting you to make a decision. You need to consider this when you make a decision in patient care. And that is such a supportive message and a consistent message across the province to all paramedics, knowing that things are changing. I don't quite understand the world I'm living in. It's VUCA, it's this fog of war. But from the province of Ontario, they've said, here's a document that's called the consideration document to use to guide your practice. So that type of consistent leadership across the province, that consistent messaging can be so important in reducing that organizational stress. And we do have a lot of control over that type of messaging. That, and again, the organizational piece, that it so exacerbates stresses, yet we have the greatest control over that.
Right. And that leads into the notion that as we're dealing with these VUCA environments, that there is trauma that people are experiencing. So in those operational conditions, there is threat of physical danger. You could get sick. You could bring that illness home to your family. You could take it to your friends and so on. Right? Within the organization, though, there's that ongoing social anxiety. Do I measure up? What do my colleagues think of me? What does the boss think of me? And when I'm taking on tasks that I haven't had to do before, so some of your procedures and protocols, so this notion of, well, just think it through. Is this the right thing to be doing? As opposed to, I'm following these prescriptive guidelines exactly as it was. How do I know if I'm doing it right? How do I know what people think about me when I do this? So that can create its own set of anxieties, even though we're trying to be supportive and we're trying to be flexible as the situation requires us to be flexible. I haven't gotten feedback on that yet. I don't know how well it's working. I don't know what people think of me. Maybe I'm making it worse for myself. Yeah. So there is that threat and that anxiety that's present there. And one of the things we know from research on cognitive processing, how we think, is that in traumatic situations, in these VUCA environments, there's a cognitive bias to look towards danger cues in our environment. Because we desperately want to be safe, we want to survive. And so there's a natural tendency for people, anybody, whether you're in public safety or any other sector of the world, to look for danger signs to protect yourself. So there's a tendency in this environment to be hyper attentive, hyper vigilant towards cues to say you are in danger. And that could be physical danger, that could be social danger. It all gets wrapped up into the same process. You're more likely to recall threatening events over events that were not threatening. And you're more likely to notice things that are threatening than things that are not threatening.
Right.
So one of the critical things for leadership to keep in mind here is that there's a natural tendency, a natural bias for people to look for evidence that they're in danger and to perceive danger as being more more significant and stronger than safety cues. So we don't need to help them find danger. We need to help them to find safety. And that's part of the process of leadership, is to create a vision of those things in your environment that are protecting you, things that you're doing that will help you to stay safe. And part of that is acknowledging that we expect this to be volatile and uncertain. And it's not about being right. It's about using a new set of processes, like Randy was pointing out in the previous slide.
Yeah, exactly. So the new set of processes, and going back to the slide before where we're talking about the tendency to pick up a cue and interpret it as dangerous, and you mentioned the social anxiety in work, where we're saying that there's that constant feeling that I need to prove myself. I think a lot of that is relieved when people better understand their position within the organization and towards the vision. And I think that's so important to right now the vision is different, and have we taken the time to tell our staff the vision is different? So that might help in interpreting some of these signals, thinking more clearly about what that signal had to do with the vision, again, rather than just my individual performance. And on the interpreting natural signals or neutral signals as threats, again, as leaders, we need to consider that goes both ways. Those signals, to me, I have to be aware that I could have a tendency right now to interpret that as a threat rather than perhaps constructive feedback about my leadership. So we need to take a moment and be human and think about how this is affecting us in our leadership roles. If I have feedback from a paramedic or from a police officer or whatever, I need to take a moment and realize think about whether it's positive feedback, whether it's something that I can use to help us align and meet our vision, and not have a tendency to think this is a gripe, this is a complaint, this is somebody who's nitpicking what we're trying to do. A lot of times it's not, but we will have a tendency, just like our subordinates will, to have that interpretational bias. And again, back to how our staff or even ourselves will immediately go to a threat or consider something to be a threat. We sometimes need to even think about changing our communication style. So I don't send emails to staff hardly ever anymore. We're doing Facebook media or social media videos, because I think this Facebook world is more comfortable for that individual. That's how they socialize. So I don't want to invade their social space, but I'm using that as a method to communicate that doesn't automatically come up as a fear trigger to them, like an email from the chief or from the quality assurance department might do. So thinking about, again, how those messages both down to subordinates and up to leadership may be misinterpreted is really important at this time, because we could be missing some pretty important cues from our staff and maybe from you as well as leaders.
Right, and something we know from lots of research about organizational visions and how we create and communicate them, that visions fundamentally can take one of two directions. One, you can have a vision of hope, and the other is a vision of fear. Yeah. And if I have a vision of fear, we've got to overcome problems and the world's scary and all this stuff, and that's what we focus on, then we encourage people to think about the worst possible. And we encourage leaders to interpret messages from their subordinates as criticisms and critiques rather than constructive feedback on how we can improve things.
Right.
A hopeful vision is one, it's not wishful thinking, it's not fairy dust and rainbows and unicorns. A hopeful vision is one where people see themselves with this organization into the future where things are better. And part of that I see things are better is I see how I fit into this, and I'm going to take actions, I'm going to do things, and I'm going to be effective to help move this towards that. And part of that effectiveness isn't that I'm perfect, it's that I can take feedback from other people and I can give feedback to other people, and that together we're going to overcome barriers to progress. And so I think part of the importance of vision and revisiting what your organizational visions is and working with your leadership teams on those is to establish this understanding that our vision includes overcoming barriers to success. And that means we're open to feedback, we're open to providing input and giving people feedback, we're open to receiving that. And so when we get it or we give it, it's not a danger sign, it's just part of our normal process. Right. And one way we align people to that, like Randy is saying, is we don't just message people through emails and things where you go, oh, I gotcha, or people feel like that when they see the subject line. But I actually make this part of a normal or an extended process. I guess I'm calling for an extended process of communication here, where Randy's not just communicating directly to his senior leadership team. He's also got some kind of list of people further down in the organization that he reaches out to. And not to talk about problems, but just say, hey, how you doing? How are things going? This is what we're doing and how things are succeeding. And he's also got his leadership team reaching out in the organization so that everybody so that we're getting a clear and consistent leadership message that, hey, you're important, we believe you're effective, and that you can make a productive difference, and we have faith and confidence in you. And if things aren't working out, we're here to support you. So part of the vision and part of the communication is around inspiring people to be able to overcome what is a truly challenging situation.
Right. Your video just lagged a little bit there, Ron, but if I could throw kind of a personal scenario into this slide. I think sometimes we can, where we think a vision is clear, we could potentially be sending the wrong message about another vision. So just for me, something that's happened recently because of COVID-19, we've had an opportunity to ramp up a new team of paramedics with temporary funding for it. It's something that I've wanted to do anyway. It's a community paramedic program. So I do my messaging out to all staff. I try to talk about what the vision is, how we're impacting the viral spread and keeping people safe in the community. But for that specific team, they heard me too often saying, I hope this is successful. I want to keep this funding going. And my vision that they were interpreting at least was success of this division, not about the grander vision to have this impact that we can have on COVID-19 and for our population. So it was interesting as we watched the team, I saw a number of good examples of interpretational bias happening. So as administrative things were going sideways in this VUCA environment they're living in, I actually started to hear people say that efforts were futile. And I thought, how could that possibly be that they would consider their efforts on this team as futile? But I came to realize that the vision they were hearing for that unit was to be administratively successful so I could continue to get funding to keep those jobs in place. And
right.
The truth was they have one of the best success rates in Ontario for testing in long-term care facilities. They're driving towards this vision. They're doing an incredible job of it. But because the vision for their unit wasn't clear, and in this unpredictable environment, they focused on triggers that they saw as mistakes or barriers to actually making that vision come true. So we had to reboot, we had to reset and talk about what the vision really is for the team and realign them to what the real vision was. And it was interesting to watch as that team came back together and were inspired to go beyond those barriers, to find solutions to them, to meet the grander vision.
Right. Which leads us into our final slide as we wrap up the formal part of the presentation here. How do we communicate with people? Now, normally, at least a lot of the managers I've worked with in my career, in and outside of academia, the traditional approach to management is management by exception, where managers in your annual review point out what you did wrong for the year, which justifies not giving you a bonus or a raise or that new position you were hoping for. And then maybe we get into some of the things you did right, because, well, you have to be balanced, because otherwise the union gets involved and you get to grievances and it gets ugly for managers, so we want to avoid that. We don't talk much about what's desired, the vision. It's much more effective in general terms, and especially in the current time, to start with what's desired. And as Randy was just saying, part of the discussion around what's desired, what the vision is making sure that we all understand the same thing. And it's easy to write down a vision statement, think, oh, everybody knows what I'm talking about now, and completely blow that. I focus them on these few key things, and they say, oh, this is all about funding, and we're failing in doing the things we need to get funding. And Randy's go, whoa, no, that's not the message I wanted you to get. And we can't get there if we don't have a conversation with people, not at the end of the year, but week to week, where we're saying, okay, this is where we're trying to go. What are we doing? What's right that's helping us to get there? What's the gap between where we are and where we want to be? And how do we bridge that gap? So this gets back to this, something I had in the previous slide, psychological safety, which just means it's safe to talk about what we need to do to bridge those gaps. We reduce those fearful elements that make us afraid about success, about how other people think about us and all these things, because it's all about working to create solutions, because we believe we're all capable of doing that. We're all adults, we're all effective, we're all competent, and we're supporting each other into leveraging that.
Yeah, in the world where we're managing by exception, we tend to, and our subordinates will tend to see things as a mistake and take ownership for it. And so again, being fearful in that environment, but it shouldn't be seen as that. It should be, as the leadership and coaching piece demonstrates here, they aren't mistakes. There may be something that deviated from the path towards the desired outcome. So what is it? How do we support getting it back on? How do we realign and support getting back on to that path to the desired outcome?
And as you were just saying, sometimes the path we put people on is not the path we wanted to put them on. We did something wrong in communicating the vision.
Yeah, it's not always the deviation. The deviation might be mine. It might be misinformation. And again, understanding the VUCA environment helps us to sort of pick up on the cues. Like I saw where people were seeing something as futile, and so how could it possibly be futile when we're heading towards the vision, the grander vision? And I realized that I didn't have the proper vision communicated to those individuals. So there's opportunities in this leadership and coaching, the positive communication side of this, to help us to recognize where we need to support and realign, or that bridge to the path that the desired path towards success.
Right. So as we wrap up I guess the formal part of the presentation for the town hall here, what are a couple key takeaways you'd like to leave with leaders in public safety, Randy?
Well, I think acknowledging that, as we did in the proviso, that this is a different world, but there are a lot of lessons we're going to learn out of this that are going to be helpful in our day-to-day leadership. It's a great example. I hate to use the word great for the current situation, but it's a great example of how our environment needs that close attention from us to understand the world that our subordinates are living in, and the need for clarity, the need for consistency in communication, the need to acknowledge that we have to be fluid as leaders. We need to be able to change our communication styles. As I said before, stop the things we're doing if we have to, and get face to face with our subordinates and have conversations with them so that we can truly hear them in a situation like this, and listen with intent to work together as a team and improve, not where we may naturally go, where we listen with an intent to protect ourselves. And we got to get away from that. Open up, be humans, listen with an intent to improve as a team. Well, there's some amazing people working really hard out there right now, and they deserve our support. And it's not that difficult to support them, as you're seeing here with some simple communication ideas, consistent messaging, having an open mind, and listen with intent to support and lead.
Right. I'd like to build on one of the things you said there, where it's not that difficult to do, as long as we recognize that we're shifting from an administrative management perspective to more of a leadership perspective. So as you said, you're reducing some of the emphasis on reporting and making sure that the written reports from the paramedics are done correctly, because we need to focus more on the people themselves during the pandemic.
Absolutely.
Environment's changed. We'll catch up on the paperwork. We can do that. We can't catch up on the mental health of our employees as they get into this hypervigilance, as they get into the fear that they're doing something wrong, or they don't quite understand this and they're not asking the right questions because they're trying to protect themselves. We can't catch up on driving them down the wrong path too long because they don't understand the vision the way we did. So they're picking up on the wrong messages from the way we communicated the vision. We need to stay vigilant with that. We need to take the time to put in the effort on a regular basis, not wait for the end of the year.
Right.
So leadership becomes more paramount. It becomes more important. We need to focus the time. And sometimes that means reprioritizing some of the things we're doing to make sure we've got the time to check in with our staff.
What's interesting is in this environment, well, we've scaled back some of the things you were just talking about, less administrative leadership. What's interesting is we see that our subordinates will start to trust, they'll start to open up. You'll see that you'll actually still often receive the desired outcome. You'll have people who are comfortable with self-reporting incidents. You don't have to go looking for them.
Right.
They'll come forward with them. They'll also engage in assisting us with change management. So having regular meetings with health and safety and labor groups right now and engaging them in decision making and being completely open and honest about why we're making decisions. It's interesting how quickly you'll actually relieve some of your burden of administration, because it's so much easier to engage them in the change up front rather than trying to backpedal as they see change as being dangerous, as they dig heels in and not want to change. You're doing far more work repairing that than you are if you engage those individuals all up front and make them a part of the decision making. And
right.
it's through being open and honest. There are paramedic services here in Ontario doing a fantastic job of telling their paramedics every day how many individual pieces of protective equipment they have left, which normally would make you quite scared to think you've only got so many masks left to protect me. But now you're open, you're honest, they understand the threat now, and they engage in actually addressing that threat with the team. So you actually end up with, as you scale back on some of that administrative burden, you actually decrease the need for it in the future. So it's,
right, because you're reducing their uncertainty, and they're better able to make their own plans and adjust their own work practices so that they can manage that in a way that they believe is going to keep them safer.
That's exactly right.
So Emily, where do we go from here?
Thank you so much for that presentation, guys. It was fantastic. So we are going to move to the question and answer period. I do want to just remind everybody that you're welcome to send in questions through the question box. So you can go ahead and do that if you haven't already. I'm going to start with, now Randy, you have addressed this a little bit, but I'm going to start with a more specific question because we've heard a lot from people that for leadership, they think the most important thing right now is communication. So you've spoken a little bit about how you are modifying your communications during this time to your staff, but I want you to speak again just to what you think the best ways are that leadership can maintain communications during a situation like this. And if there's anything really novel that you've done that you found really successful during this time.
Right. So I guess back to the provider, this is my opinion only. This is not representing anyone other than myself. So I went away from all of the traditional messaging. I'm trying to avoid the memos, the emails. As I said before, we have this interpretational bias. So an email from a chief can't be good. So like I said, it's like seeing a snake. It's like, that's got to be dangerous. It's a snake. This is an email. So actually I've tried to move away from that as much as possible. And I've actually gone to inviting my staff to join a private Facebook page that we have that's just our team. So we're sending out positive messages as they come in. When we're getting feedback from the public, we put it up there. But I will do, and I've decreased the frequency over the last week or so, but a couple of times a week, maybe 3 times a week, I would get on a Facebook Live and just talk to the staff. And generally it's at home in my living room or in my home office, and have a chat with the staff, tell them what we're doing, how well we're doing, try to, without being too overt with it, I try to talk about how we're meeting that mission of protecting the community. So it's a different form right now because I think that's important to have something that's comfortable. And again, it's voluntary. I don't want to interfere with somebody's social media life, but if they want to get on, and I've had some really great feedback about that. People are coming to the office and saying, thank you for the messaging. Taking time to have daily meetings. I'm having meetings with my supervisors that I didn't have before. And I think we'll probably see it carry on because we've learned a lot about not just consistent leadership during the pandemic, but consistent leadership in general. Having supervisors meet every day, and I have people who are off duty that are calling into the meetings just to hear about what's changed in protocols, personal protective equipment levels, so they all understand, all have the same message. And we're getting feedback that that's inconsistent, or that's fixing the inconsistency that we were seeing in the past. And I think a big success, as I just mentioned, about engaging labor and engaging the health and safety groups in decision making up front. So right now it's a weekly meeting, just to say, here's where we're at, here are the decisions we have to make. Engage them in all of those so that they understand things like the difficult situation we may be in, where we make decisions about conserving personal protective equipment. And so being a part of the decision making up front and understanding it, rather than trying to explain it after the fact when an interpretational bias is going to kick in and automatically think they made that decision without me, therefore it's a bad decision. So having them be a part of it, I think, is incredibly important. Hope that wasn't too long for you, Emily.
Perfect. Ron, a question for you. Based on research and your own experience, what do you see are the best ways organizations can run or like run regularly, so that when something like COVID comes along, they're prepared to operate in a situation where it isn't business as usual, so that they are more prepared for those challenges that might come up just by their regular organization?
Well, I think something Randy just referred to is appropriate here. And it's this notion that you have more meetings with people you normally wouldn't have. And I think one of the things that happens there is you start becoming more aware of incidents that are happening on the ground that you wouldn't normally see, or you're seeing how, well, you're getting different perspectives. So your financial team is going to see things different from your paramedics. When I work with Calgary Police, they talk about how we move uniformed officers in as supervisors in different units, and they have different goals, they have different beliefs about how a unit should be run. And so you get this inconsistency that way. But if there was a common vision so that those new supervisors are talking to the superintendents and the deputy directors in a regular way, and we see how the finance and the logistics and the tactical team and all these others actually affect each other, and you start getting a more consistent view of how we use those different elements of the organization to deal with changes in our environment on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. So you start becoming more adept at dealing with change in the environment, even without it being something as significant as a pandemic. So if a pandemic does come along, you've got some natural relationships and connections and informal processes that already allow you to start accessing information, processing information in a more complete way, and making better decisions earlier on. So I mean, things like, well, when should we have started going into the lockdown? A lot of people would say, well, we should have started this in January. That decision, at least for CIPSRT, didn't happen until March 13th. And I know that because I was involved in making the decision about shutting down a national training program in the midst of a training session. But if we had been doing some of these things as a normal part of business, then I think we would have been less caught by surprise by the way some of this rapidly evolved. So I think having those regular meetings and having a different view as to when the chief executives should be communicating with people further down the leadership chain, and have that more of a regular part of the process, I think leads us to have more flexible organizations. And two, leaders now become less intimidating. Right? They're real people, just like the rest of us, and they have a role to play, and we have a role to play. Which brings to mind something we've seen with the research was status makes a huge difference here. People get scared to death about speaking up to people of higher power unless you actively work to bring down some of those status barriers. And when we get into a pandemic or any kind of major crisis, those status barriers can loom huge. So if you have a paramedic talking to an emergency room physician, well, the doctor's got all the power. What can the paramedics say? How can they contribute? But they're seeing things the doctors can't see. And we need to have that, you know, in a pandemic especially, we really need to have that conversation going both ways. So we need to reduce those status barriers. We need to encourage people to talk together and exchange their expertise, exchange their knowledge and the information they're receiving, so we can make real decisions in real time that are more effective.
I think an interesting thing, if you don't mind, if I can jump on that.
Yeah, go ahead.
An interesting piece of that is that, again, going into those meetings, going into them in normal times and acknowledging our own effects on us with the VUCA environment as leaders as well. So understanding that the communications are not threatening. They're not, we have this bias. We tend to go back to all right, we're having a meeting with health and safety again, so this is going to be, they're going to complain about such and such, it's going to be bad. You tend to recall a bad incident that's happened in the past, so you have that recall bias, and you're going to assume it's going to be bad, and it's going to be threatening. We got to wipe it aside, and so will the other side, and you start to have more productive dialogue if you really listen with intent to acknowledge their valued input and improve. And it's the same with things like quality assurance reviews. And I don't know the other worlds as well as I know paramedic services, but we have these quality assurance reviews. We need to early on remove that sort of, it's interpreted right now as here's a demand from leadership to justify my actions on this call and in this patient care. And we need to move away from that early and put a system in place where a paramedic feels as if their leadership are asking them for their valued and learned experience so that we can get better, move towards our vision. We said the same thing in a different way. You know, they're interpreting it as a demand to justify their actions. We need day to day to move towards something where we're not just asking them to justify their actions, we're asking for their valued experience on that incident to help us to figure out what that gap was between what we as managers would think was wrong, and as leaders we think is a gap towards a desired path. So that type of work ahead of time is extremely valuable in times like this.
Right, and part of that obviously is getting people comfortable with the idea that we also want them to say, this is what I'm doing right.
Exactly.
And we accept that, right? So it's not just a report on where we're screwing things up, but what's the goal?
Right.
What do we do that's actually successful in moving us towards that, right? So we want to bolster people's self-confidence. We want to bolster their esteem so they are able to make those more difficult situations more acceptable, less stress-inducing.
Exactly.
So kind of a follow-up to that, or just another question is, as a leader, how do you monitor your members' mental health? Like, how do you take the temperature, as it were, and how do you know that the interventions that you're using are working for them when it comes to their mental health?
So, to me first.
Yeah, to you first, Randy. Sorry.
I think there are a lot of cues, a lot of clues. If communication isn't occurring, we know we have a problem. I think when people are comfortable coming forward, as we just discussed, and talking about what went right, what went wrong, if they're comfortable self-reporting, we know we're doing things the right way. So we've done things like we've surveyed our staff to see how they're doing, and I don't think that's as effective as actually just monitoring the environment and monitoring communications. To me, that's probably one of the most important pieces, is to hear what they have to say about what's going on, and watching to make sure people feel comfortable to talk to us. I think those are pretty important cues.
Right, and I would add to that, if we look at what we're doing with the Road to Mental Readiness training, we have our mental health cheat sheet, and we say, okay, so are we having a green, yellow, orange, or red day? Well, you can normalize people talking about their mental health and how they're feeling about things in any given time. So if we're talking about, I have this desired vision of the future, and we have these things that are helping us to success, and these are some barriers. Well, part of the barriers are, I'm having a bad day. And if we normalize talking about barriers as an organizational issue, not a problem of individuals, then I think it becomes easier to monitor that, both for myself and for the people around me, saying, hey, Ron, you look like you're having an orange day or a yellow day. I'm a little concerned about you today. Is everything okay? Is there anything we can do to help? I think part of this is just normalizing these conversations about those things that are barriers to performance, and some of those are mental health issues.
Yeah, making sure staff understand that we feel it's okay to be okay, and it's okay to be not okay. You know, so right. Whatever you're dealing with, it's okay to tell us about it. It's okay to feel that way, and having it be a safe place for them to say, yeah, I feel okay, or I don't.
Right. And I think we need to get to an understanding that part of the role of leadership is to be supportive of employees. And we support employees in succeeding, and we support them in working with their strengths. And we support employees for being human and being less than perfect. And we support them through the barriers and the problems they're dealing with. Right. And when we hire them as this package of strengths and weaknesses. And that's okay.
Exactly. Strong messaging, especially right now, that it's okay. We know that times are tough. We are here for you. We've got your back. and mean it when you say it.
Just one last question, and I'm going to point this at Randy first. Sorry. Currently, we've talked previously in our town hall series about moral injury, and we know that currently, especially paramedics, may be starting to feel guilt about sometimes having to separate people from their families when they're taking them into hospital, or even guilt when they have to go into long-term care homes and do the testing, which we know is happening. Which it's great that the testing is being done, but it's probably hard that it has to be them. What are you doing as a leader to support them with those possible feelings of guilt?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and it's so incredibly relevant right now. There are so many ways that our staff could be experiencing moral injury. So you named a few of them, being in the long-term care setting, as you said, and witnessing some really difficult situations. Also making decisions around patient care, and that's not just for paramedics, firefighters, in the corrections world. There are really some significant things that are changing that are potentially causing moral injuries, things we're seeing, things we're doing, decisions we're making that we didn't make before, and it's difficult. Being in the long-term care setting, I think, is a good example to look at. Our folks have now done COVID testing on around the 3,000 mark of individuals in the community and people in long-term care. So going from patient to patient and hearing the stories about how they just want to touch a loved one. It's been forever since they, the best they're getting is being wheeled to a window. And, that really weighs on our staff as they hear that, they experience it, and they take that on their shoulders. But I think the thing that has helped the most, and I think it's really interesting for my group, because I talked about how we were off of our vision and we saw them being affected differently because they didn't truly understand the vision and what they were doing in long-term care settings. And they focused on these problems that they were seeing, and it was weighing them down with the moral injuries. But since we've clarified what the vision is and connected what they're experiencing to that vision, just imagine how much longer it would be for those individuals before they were able to touch a loved one if we weren't doing what we were doing for them. The decisions we're making are actually avoiding significant viral spread in an unprecedented time. These individuals are doing just amazing work for our community, for our province, our country, our world. And it's connecting the work that they're doing back to that vision that I think gives them some extra strength to hold what they're holding and understand what they're experiencing. So in my mind, I think that's been really effective in assisting with that moral injury, or the compassion fatigue that they're seeing or they're experiencing.
Yeah,
Do you have any final comments?
Well, I would just, I don't know if support's the right word, but if we look at the research on moral injury, one of the common causes seems to be that people violate their values. Their values are the organization's values. Yeah. And I think in this time when we're changing practices, there's this risk that people feel as if they're violating the values that they've held dear for years now as part of their professional image. And I think we need to get people to step back and say, yeah, okay, I'm keeping this glass barrier between these people, and it's killing. In some ways, people feel like this is killing me, that I can't touch my grandchildren. But the reality is you're keeping them safe long enough that the pandemic goes past and they actually can be around long enough to touch them for a long time.
That's right.
And in really profound ways. So I think part of the issue here when we talk about the vision and working the vision as leaders is we need to be explicit in tapping into some of those organizational values that we hold very dear and say, yes, in doing these things, you're actually supporting those visions and you're being consistent with who you think you are as a compassionate, caring, helpful, professional individual. And I know it didn't look that way, but we need to reframe this. Being caring, being professional, and being competent means I am doing these things in a different way because it's part of the bigger picture and the bigger set of values that we hold dear.
Well said.
Well, I'd like to thank you both for being here with us today for this town hall. Your information has been invaluable, I'm sure, to our audience. And just a reminder that tomorrow, those who are attending today will receive an email. It is going to offer you a survey about today's town hall. It's also going to offer you a copy of the video. Video will also be posted to our website. I hope that you all consider joining us next week for our town hall on May the 14th. The title of the town hall is "My Parent is a First Responder, How Do I Feel?" We want to let people know that this is a little bit special. This is the first town hall that we are doing that's going to be aimed at children of our first responders. So we encourage children and parents to attend it together so that they can learn some skills about dealing with how it might feel to have a parent as a first responder at this time. Again, if you have any questions, you can email them to the address that's provided on the screen. Randy, Ron, thank you so much for coming today.
My pleasure.
Everyone, stay safe and take care.
Thank you.